So this week I watched The Zone of Interest in the cinema, and it was a film that really stuck with me. It wasn't being shown in a large theatre and there were probably about only 30 people in there, but I think we all had the same reaction at the end of it when the credits started rolling. We were just shocked into complete silence at what we'd just watched. This film was focused on the Hoss family who lived next door to Auschwitz, and what it did was it merged the beautiful setting of the house with the horror that was occurring on the other side of the wall. It focused more on what we didn't see in order to make the weight of what we were hearing cut through and provide a real sense of disgust and uncomfortability in our head. Sound was at the core of this movie, along with going against the grain and showing us the opposite in what we were seeing. With it still being so fresh in my mind and the sound being something that I was just amazed by within the film, I wanted to discuss how The Zone of Interest used its sound to showcase the horror of Auschwitz. So let's get into it. This video will contain spoilers from the film, so you've been warned. The background noise and getting used to death. Now, you and I are used to hearing day-to-day background noise being something like this. It's peaceful, birds are singing, and just the ambience of the wind. It's just the sound of the world, right? We never really notice it, and it just blends in behind everything else, unless we consciously decide to focus in on it. This film took the background noise that everybody's used to hearing, the ambience of just day-to-day life, and merged it with what one would have heard had they lived next door to Auschwitz, the place where this film was set, something which could only be described as the sound of death, torture, and pure evil being inflicted onto others. We mainly heard this when we were spending time with Hedwig, as she was the person who was in the house the most and loved and cared for the house. What made the listening to all of this even more unsettling was the fact that herself, Rudolf, and their children were just numb to the sound of suffering and death, so much so that she was adamant that she wanted to stay in the house when Rudolf was getting transferred, showing that the killings that she heard on a daily basis didn't bother her in the slightest. We would often be focused inside the extremely beautiful house, with a garden that was full of such life which was blossoming with the flowers coming into bloom, and happiness being exhibited with the children playing. But all throughout the background of this lovely visual which was in our direct sight and the many conversations that were taking place was the ambience of the sound of the day, with gunshots and screams occurring in the background. However, nobody seemed to bat an eyelid, as if it was just what they were used to hearing and it had truly become the background to their life. The sound of their life was death. It was just so hard to listen to. The family had become desensitized to the sound of death, and what made it even more haunting was the fact that every gunshot that we heard in the background was essentially somebody dying on the other side of the wall, in conditions which were the polar opposite to the beautiful house that we spent our time in. I couldn't tell you how many times I heard a gunshot in the film, and if I tried to count, I'd just lose count. But that in itself, just hearing the gunshots constantly all throughout the film, was powerful enough alone. I'd never experienced being in an environment in a film before which was so lovely in terms of the house and the garden, but it just being contrasted with a sound which was so uncomfortable to listen to that it made my head just feel so confused and made the background sound essentially come to the forefront. This was because the terror that lay on the other side of the wall overpowered the beauty that was in front of us when we were inside of the house, something which made it even more uncomfortable because for us, it was hard to hear, but for them, it was easy. Something that was just difficult to understand. The film wasn't about making something so visually hard to watch, because that could have been done, and it has been done before, but it was about upsetting the other senses that we have, our hearing. And by providing a backdrop of audio that made me want to close off my ears and having it in front of an environment of day-to-day living that was taking place in a home that was nicely done, it made the film as much of an experience on the ears as it was on the eyes, something which I commend it for. A conversation, being killed over an apple. Another way that the film used sound in a powerful way was in one particular scene which stood out to me. Rather than just hearing the gunshots and general background noise, we managed to focus in on a conversation that was taking place. Again, we didn't see the scene being portrayed in front of us in a visual sense, but we just heard it. We saw Rudolf's son listening to a guard getting involved because two prisoners had been fighting over an apple, and due to the both of them getting into a disagreement, the guard ordered the prisoner to stand over the river and be drowned. If not that, then they were going to be killed in another way. This was a horrific thing to hear being depicted, and the pleading for one's life was just heart-wrenching and gut-wrenching to listen to. It showed the brutality that was on the other side of the wall in a way that made us imagine it in our own minds. something that I feel is far more damaging and powerful. This is because it was left down to us to imagine the scene that was taking place, and it was just unforgettable. It sits in your mind longer because you had to draw up the individuals and the scene taking place based on the conversation and altercation that we heard happening. With a gunshot being one of the final things that we heard in the scene, a repeated noise that still landed with impact, and with the young boy listening on and not truly understanding the severity of it as he simply said, "Don't do that again." It kept death at the forefront despite being in the background, and it just shone a light on the reality that many people were living through. The background visuals, smoke and the orange glow. One thing that I wanted to mention in this video that's loosely connected to the way that the sound was treated in this film is the way that the horrors in the background were treated from a visual perspective. As I mentioned in the first section about the daily ambience being in the background and becoming the forefront, the same was also apparent for the background visuals. With the house being positioned next to the camp, it meant that there was this constant, ever-present visual of the camp that was imposing. At family meals, during the night, and even when in the garden, the watchtower was always visible from a window in the house, which was something which felt extremely haunting. And despite the tower not being there with the purpose of looking into the house, it felt like it was. And it was this constant reminder of what was on the other side. The smoke that was billowing from the chimneys as the bodies were being burned was something which was also contrasted with playing in the garden and life being enjoyed. Plus the orange glow lighting up the night, ensuring that no darkness was ever present due to the burning of the bodies, was another moment which stuck in my head. Even the smoke from the train as it was entering the station. We didn't see the train, but the smoke was all we needed to see to know that there were thousands of people that were crammed into it that may well have died on the journey and were being dropped off not knowing their fate, and were most likely walking into the place where they were going to die. It was so haunting, and even though these things were in the background, they felt like the foreground, and they stood out and overshadowed the beauty which was the house that was in our direct line of sight. The piano melody. The final section that I'll touch on, which is focused on the sound, is a piece of music that the young girl found whilst leaving food on construction sites for the prisoners during the night. When she returned home, we saw that she got out the sheet music and proceeded to play it on the piano, which was accompanied by words on the screen and a melody. This piece of music was actually composed by former Auschwitz prisoner Joseph Wolf. There was an actual recording that was done of Wolf singing the song, which is where the inclusion in this film came from. The melody to the song we heard was called Sunbeams, which was a song about missing his wife. The lyrics and melody were focused around a sense of trying to seek hope and waiting for the freedom that could be on the horizon, and he hoped was on the horizon one day soon. This feature of sound had a stark contrast to the ever-present death that was apparent when inside of the house. It stood out for reasons of its own, and was the only thing that cut through the silence that we heard for the first time in the entire runtime. It was so powerful, and the fact that it was something which was authentic and the only time in the film that we heard from the perspective of somebody on the other side of the wall, it made it even more hard-hitting. Sound was something which really did take the center stage in this film, and I don't think I've seen a film that has put as much emphasis on the background sound as this one. It became the forefront, and it had the exact same effect as if we were watching the brutality happen in front of our eyes. Even now, I still think back to when I was sitting in the cinema, hearing what was happening on the other side of the wall, and it's just horrific knowing the family were numb to it all and were enjoying life on the other side, knowing that there was so much death only meters away from them. I truly feel that this film deserves the Oscar for the category of sound because it was just so powerful. So, there you have it, how the Zone of Interest uses sound to show the horror of Auschwitz. If you want to see my review on the movie and my explanation of the ending and what it meant, then click on the card in the top corner. Or alternatively, you can head over to my channel where you'll find it as well. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next one.